It's always been one of my favorite questions when people ask me why the prophets make it so difficult. And as a therapist, yes, I like to get into difficult concepts. We've got hundreds of videos up. Some of them are pretty deep. Last week we did the allegory of the cave of Plato. It can be deep stuff, right? We're going to make this as simple as possible. It's the simplest of all concepts that's spiritual and therapeutic at the same time. Super simple, so simple that people will overlook it and not do it. And it's as simple as this. When you put your hand on a hot stove, do you have to think about what you need to do? Do you like, that hurts, maybe I should put my other hand on it, maybe rest my knee on it? Or what do you do if you put your hand on a hot stove? Instantly, pull it away, right? You don't have to think about it. You know, that hurts, pull away. That hurts, go in a different direction. What we're going to be talking about today is that, but from a mental health and a spiritual perspective, okay? That we often get hurt, but we don't pull away. We actually double down on it for some reason, and we continue to persist with the way we're doing things instead of pulling away and going in a different direction. So I'm going to try to make that point clear as we go through this, what I consider to be the easiest of all spiritual concepts. Yes, I'm going to talk for a while about them, but it's a super simple concept. And it's an idea that escapes a lot of people, but if you're interested in applying it yourself, you'll notice, yeah, it's much easier to live life this way when we pay attention to this simple concept. So the idea of this came from the other day. My wife took me to a movie, the God's Not Dead movie, the In God We Trust movie. Now, we happen to have a family friend. My wife is friends with a woman who my daughter is friends with. Her child, her name is Holly Jones, and she's in the movie In God We Trust, God Not Dead. So we went to watch Holly make her big screen debut. She was awesome. Everyone go watch the movie and support Holly. She was wonderful in it. Anyhow, in that movie, there was a line in which the two characters were talking, and it was a woman that asked, Reverend Dave asked him about how he feels inspired and, when does he know that it's God talking to him? And what Dave said very clearly was, when you listen to his voice enough, you will recognize it. I'm like, that's good. I quickly opened up my phone and I texted that to myself to remember. And I'm like, I want to do my group on this, okay? If you listen to the voice enough, you will recognize it. Well, what if we're listening to the wrong voice? See, we all have voices in our head. We call them thoughts, but they're always up there all day long. Are you listening to the right voice? So while that answer was perfect, I'm going to go through a lot of different layers of what that voice is and what we're supposed to be listening to in particular. Keeping in mind, one, there's a really simple solution here in all of this to know when you're listening to God and when you're not listening to God. And I'm going to tie it into one of the most famous Bible verses, Genesis 2:17. Now, most people probably don't know what that is by me saying it. But by the end of today, you're going to remember, you're going to know what that is, if I do this the right way. So we are going to go through the voice inside your head, using the concept from Hermes that we talked about a couple months ago, of the idea of one mind but two poles. Like this stick, when I hold it like this, has a higher end and a lower end. Hermes taught that all of us are mind, what we are. All of creation is about the mind states that we have. And there's the law of polarity. There's a higher mind and a lower mind. Well, we have a higher mind and a lower mind in this world that we're experiencing. And very clearly, when I like to make this as simple as possible, the ego itself, which is the devil, go read the Bible and swap the word devil for ego. It'll make more sense. Because the devil it causes the pain. The devil is where we're going to find hell. There's not a little to do with the pitchfork, okay? It's a state of mind that we have. And why is it like that? Because the ego itself, the physical ego, which is greatly misunderstood in most cultures, but I like to make it simple from the spiritual concept. The ego is the lower mind. And the ego does one thing. It focuses on the physical world. What a simple concept. That's all the ego is. Now, when we think of the ego as someone who's arrogant, that's true, but they're arrogant because they think they're beautiful or they're special. They got these great talents, okay? And that person is often described as having a big ego. But someone who's self-critical and focuses on their negative aspects of self and beats themselves up for their physical mistakes, they also have a big ego. Because they're focused on the physical world. That's what an ego is. And so you do have a mind that focuses on physical things. Lower mind. Now, in contrast with that is the higher mind, which is the spiritual mind. It's the In God We Trust mind. And again, God, I could say like this, air quotes, God means a lot of different things. Simply put, God as love works for me. And it's very therapeutic to think of, you have a part of your mind that's made up of just love, and it only sees love. Let's just call that God, all right? Well, you have that, and it has a very specific tendency as well. It focuses on non-physical things. So while the ego is focusing on physical things, like where's my car keys? What time does my appointment start? How's my hair look? That's what the ego looks for. Well, the spirit or the God mind focuses on something else altogether. And we're going to get more into that as we go along. See, the ego, part of its skill set is edging God out, EGO. Okay, that's one of those recovery things. EGO, edging God out, because the ego's impulse is not to think in terms of spirituality. The ego literally can't do that. The ego wants to find the car keys, okay? That's what it's supposed to be doing. And so it edges God out. It doesn't flip meaning into things. You have another mind that's supposed to do that. It's why Einstein himself said, a couple weeks ago we talked about this, Einstein said, science can only do so much, but one thing we all have in common as human beings is we want to establish meaning in our lives. And Einstein said, science won't do that. You have to find that from another source. I thought that was great, okay? Because guess what? Science can do a lot, physical world focus, on the ego side of things, but it can't establish meaning. And if you have another part of your mind, and you do, the higher part, that has a mind, which we're going to call God, good, orderly direction. Again, another recovery line, okay? Because it's certainly therapeutic. And as we go through this, once you shift perception off of the physical world onto the spiritual world, now we're going to make some progress, because this is what good therapy is. Let's look at the situation different. I know the situation happened to you, but as the situation happened to you, can you put a different perspective on it? And you need the higher mind for that. Why? Because the ego, Wayne Dyer, I was told, said this first, but I'm sure others have said it. Ego is also earth guide only. Earth guide only. Ego. It only is here for physical guides. Okay? We are here to be paying attention to physical world stuff, and the ego can help us with that. No doubt about it. That's part of it. But it's the earth guide only. It is terrible at assessing meaning. It's not its skill set. The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, I also talked about that recently, describes the two parts of your mind. One part of your mind is the wise guide. It's what they say is it's a voice that you rarely attend to. And we talked about that as the still small voice, which is 1 Kings 19:12. It's a still small voice. Why don't we hear that still small voice? Well, because of 1 Corinthians 13:1. If you speak in the tongues of men and angels, but you have not love, you are a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal. Well, guess what the ego sounds like? Does that ring a bell for you? You ever have a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal up there in your head? Yeah, that's the ego going blah, 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 right? Because it's chiming its opinion on things. Your job is to tell me where my car keys are, okay? Not to assess whether or not this situation is good or bad. And if you decide that it's good or bad, because you know what the ego is going to do, is going to trip you up. It's the devil after all. Not only can you not find your car keys, you're an idiot for not being able to find them. And now you're going to be late, so you better hurry up. Guess what you just got? Suffering. Because the ego has got this narrative going on, trying to tell you what's going on. And yet that's not true. You have this wise guy, that's still small voice that's whispering, don't listen to the ego. It's an idiot. It's stepping out of its lane. It's an earth guide only, but it's sounding like a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal because it has not love. We just established God is love, right? So let's listen to that voice, the still small voice. In Revolver, one of my favorite all-time movies for ego exploration, Guy Ritchie, they talk about how the ego is the cause of all our suffering. Quite literally, they say all the crime that's ever been committed is committed because of ego. Okay? All the pain and suffering we have is because of ego. And what does the Buddha say about suffering? It happens because of attachment, and we all go through it. But guess what's attached to things? The ego. Because the ego is attached to its identity. It's attached to its possessions. It's attached to people. It's attached to its religion. It's attached to its language and its favorite football team. It is attached to the idea that this physical world is the ultimate reality. None of those things are true, ultimately. We have to let all that go, ultimately. If you want to listen to this voice, it says stuff like, you got to let it go, okay? It is what it is. Forgive, mercy, all right? Release. Trust that you're a divine spiritual being, as opposed to someone who's trying to control things down here in the world. The Spirit has this wonderful way of whispering that to you. If you don't listen to it, suffering happens. And what did the Buddha teach? You don't have to suffer. We suffer because of our attachments, but what if we learn how to detach? There's this Four Noble Truths in a nutshell. If we detach, we don't suffer anymore. What did Viktor Frankl say? If you give meaning to suffering, you can no longer suffer. Now, the ego can't give it meaning because the ego sucks at that job. That's not its job. You have another voice inside your head that's supposed to awaken. And as that voice awakens, it will give meaning to your suffering. Then what happens to the suffering then? It diminishes. What happens to the ego then? It diminishes. What does John say in the Gospel of John? I must decrease so he may increase. He's talking about this. The ego literally in Greek means I. The ego must decrease so that the spirit may increase. When I shut up the noisy gong and the clanging cymbal in the church, I can hear the church mouse. When you quiet that voice that's trying to give you advice, and it's bad advice, the ego's never right. It might get lucky every once in a while, but it's not doing that intentionally. It's tripping you up, and it's causing all the suffering, and we're not listening to this voice. But if we can quiet it, we can hear that. See, the ego, its job is to compare. The ego specifically says, that's good and that's bad. You're better than me, you're worse than me. That's the ego's job. It's a comparison tool. We're in the world of duality. The ego needs to be present so I can go, is that a red light or a green light? Okay? Because I need to stop at the red light. Okay? And so we need an ego. Plus, boys' room, girls' room kind of stuff, or when's my wife's birthday, got to remember that. Things like that's what the ego's job is. But assessing beyond that, that's not its job. So the ego literally works on things like separation. Are my car keys over there or are they over there? Is my appointment at 3 a.m. or 3 p.m.? Thank goodness we have an ego to figure that stuff out. Because the spirit would be like, I don't care when your appointment is. It doesn't really matter to me. You don't need your car keys. You just walk or just don't go anywhere. That's what the spirit would be saying. It's not spirit guide. The spirit isn't the earth guide. We need an ego. That's why I don't like that concept, ego death. You need the ego. We just got to balance it out with something. What is the spirit working on? The spirit works on similarity. Ego works on separation because it needs to define in a world of duality, the differences between things. But the spirit looks at similarities. It looks at, what do we all have in common here? While the ego is working on separation, the spirit's working on unity. Notice how the ego will notice things like race and gender and sexual orientation, political affiliation and religion and all that, and then it'll try to pontificate. How's that going in the world when we notice these differences and then we try to judge the differences based upon the ego? It's not going very well, is it? I wonder if Jesus ever said anything. Oh yeah, don't judge by mere appearance. He says, judge correctly. Mere appearance is what happens when the ego makes the decision. Judge correctly is what happens when the spirit makes the decision. Because we have that voice, and it's going to see the unity in things. It's going to see the fairness in things. It's going to see that there's no wasted moment. Whatever adversity you went through, it's teaching you something greater. Apostle Paul, to rejoice in your sufferings. Well, do you think the ego wants to rejoice in its sufferings? The ego says, that's stupid. Your religion is stupid. I'm not going to rejoice in my sufferings. And I'm like, well, therapeutically, it makes sense to rejoice more often, doesn't it? No, I want to be miserable. Then be miserable. I don't care. Also know if you can figure out that rejoicing in your sufferings decreases the ego so that the spirit can increase and then you can see clearly, then rejoice away. Right? Now, ego doesn't like that, but if that's the voice you're listening to, well, you'll suffer more as a result. So if we learn how to do that, especially if we do it as a group, because, unity and all, if we all practice that together, it'd be a great accelerant. And it's going to help us get out of prison, because the ego is the prison. Again, Matrix and Revolver. In the Matrix, what does Morpheus tell Neo, who's working on, ultimately, his freedom, his spirituality of things? And he tells him that, Neo, you're a slave. You find yourself behind bars you cannot see or touch. It's a prison for your own mind. That's the ego, because we get locked into our perspective. And mine's different than yours. And I'm right and you're wrong, or vice versa. And now we're going to suffer and argue, and we're going to have wars, all because of the ego. Meanwhile, getting out of that prison, to escape the prison, is to recognize that, we're in a matrix of sorts. Neo does wake up in the end. He sees everything as the illusion that it is, and the energy of things. That's because we're actually all spirit. I said Jesus taught us, so did Einstein, that the whole world's energy. The whole world is light. In the beginning, God said, let there be light. We're all made out of light. Einstein said the whole world's an illusion. Well, the ego looks at it as physical focus, and guess what? It's an illusion. My body's actually made out of light, atoms, frequency, and vibration. You think the ego gets that? No. It's like, that's stupid. Okay. What are you spoken? That's how ego looks at stuff. And I'll stay in prison as a result. In Revolver, my favorite credits of any movie ever, go watch the movie Revolver and just watch the credits in which it describes the ego beautifully. And one of the many teachers says the thing about the ego, it's a confidence trickster. It disguises itself as you. And that voice we hear, it makes you think it's you. So it's hidden itself in you. Where's the last place an enemy will hide, they talk about in this movie? The last place you'd expect. What if your enemy's hiding in you? And then what if we do is what we take with the physical world and we project all our stuff onto other people. And then we get this stuff back from them. Of Course in Miracles talks about attack thoughts and we blame the other person. Well, we're going to be locked in the matrix still. But the concept of the ego being this false self, this temporary identity, that's super important because it exists, but it's a temporary identity, stands in contrast to what freedom actually is. Now, freedom, 2 Corinthians 3:17, says this, now the Lord is spirit, and where the spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Now notice, most people, especially with Christianity, hear the word Lord, they go straight to Jesus. Totally fine, I don't have a problem with that. But if we settle on Jesus the flesh, coming from the guy in John 6:63 who says the flesh counts for nothing, if we settle on Jesus as the flesh and we think that's the Lord, we just lost it. This literally says the Lord is the Spirit. And wherever that's present, you're free. Well, that's this side of the board again. What was Jesus? A carrier of the Spirit, right? He knew he was God. He also told us we were God too. Know ye not your gods? You are the light. I'm the light. He wasn't trying to be better than anyone. Where was Jesus arrogant? People have become arrogant talking about him, just as they do in all religions, but Jesus wasn't. He was terribly humble, but he was also confident. Because he knew equals, total unifying. And where does he, when he was asked the most important commandment in Mark, he says, hear, O Israel, the Lord is one. That's the first thing that he says. The Lord is one. Well, I just described the Lord as the Spirit. And it's one because each of us have it. Everyone has it. No one doesn't have it. Just different levels of growth. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one. What a unifying dude that is. Okay? And he wasn't trying to be arrogant and everybody must just follow me or whatever. Oh, you have to follow the way through him for sure. But it's the Spirit, which it says right there. The Spirit is the Lord. And if it's present in you, then it's present in me, and we do this all together, that's unity. Okay? So, escape prison by listening to this voice. And guess what happens? You can still circle back and find your car keys, but you're going to do it gracefully. And if you see someone in traffic, you stop at a red light, but they don't. You're going to call the cops, you're going to deal with the situation, but you'll do so gracefully and mercifully and forgiving and all that kind of stuff. The ego won't like that, but you've just tamed it. It's also called a crucifixion. We have to shut that thing up as this thing starts to grow. So now I, as a retired sports writer, love this sports analogy. I'm saving it for the end. I love it, but if you like sports or just get this idea, it works perfectly well. And it's this, if you're listening to a football game, there's almost always two commentators. You have the play-by-play and then the color commentator, right? And they both have unique different skills they bring to the game. What does the play-by-play guy do? He gives the facts, okay? Joe threw the ball to Sam over there. Now he's running for the end zone. Facts, thank you very much. Then what's the color commentator do? He offers some insight on the play. Well, I think Joe saw the safety, sneaking in, and then, he had happy feet for a minute, but then, he delivered the ball. What a fine pass. So Joe, or the color commentator, gives the insight, and he gives the perspective, right? And he contextualizes it. The play-by-play is supposed to give the facts. And then the color commentator is supposed to layer it with some sort of meaning. So you have that inside your head, and the ego is very useful. It's the play-by-play. What time is it? When do I have to go to bed? Who moved my cheese? You're allowed to ask these questions. But then the Spirit is the one that's supposed to give you the color commentary. The Spirit's supposed to say, all right, that guy just cut me off. I do have to call the cops. How should I handle this situation? That guy's an SOB and, I'm going to go strangle him or whatever. You weren't listening to this voice. That's not a unifying voice. The voice that understands that we all screw up and make mistakes and we're going to be merciful with each other. That voice understands, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Right? That voice understands why the meek inherit the earth. Because it's the ego meek. Why the poor, the ego poor are celebrated. Not physically poor, that's more physical focus. Okay? There's nothing wrong with giving money to charities for sure. But the people that are really, really sick are people who are broke down in spirit. And that can be the millionaires, right? As I say, we often elect them president. And that group of people, spiritually broken. Who did Jesus hang out with? He hung out with the poor, the physically poor. Why? Because the ego has already been diminished in almost every case. So many cases. At least they're more open for the spirit. Now, the spirit voice inside your head will give you that color commentary. And it feels so much better because it's so much easier to not judge. And then you actually feel for the people who are spiritually broken, and you're not worried about the financial aspect of things. Although, again, I'm telling you, I'm not saying you shouldn't donate to charity. That's not what I'm saying. Spirit might guide you to do that. But who we actually have to try to help are the people who are spiritually broken. Okay? Now, color commentators will do that. Now notice, especially with what I was just saying, this verse that I saved for the very end. Genesis 2:17 specifically says to not eat off the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. What? Don't eat off a tree that includes knowledge? I thought knowledge was good. Well, it is if you want to know where your car keys are, how to change the oil in your car. That's useful. But what is this type of knowledge? The knowledge of good and evil. Okay? Because the ego is all over that, okay? The ego is going to absolutely say there's good and evil everywhere, doesn't it? No doubt about it. And it's easy for all of us could think that if I said, give me something that's evil. You could do it, right? And we live our lives listening to that voice so much. We're told in Genesis, don't eat off that tree. What are we told in Genesis 2:9 and 2:16? Oh, there's another tree called the tree of life. You may eat freely off of that tree. So if we think of the voice inside our head as the thing that's eating off the knowledge of good and evil, it's the thing that's comparing. It's the thing that's doing exactly what we talked about over here. It's the thing that says that's good and that's bad. And we're told don't eat off that tree. Now, when you've resurrected the spiritual self, now it's going to stay in its lane. And that's totally fine. We need those types of assessments. But super important that we don't label things as evil. Now, all evil is, we just did all the hermeneutics, evil is the absence of love. It exists, but it exists like cold as the absence of heat. How do you make something that is void of love, how do you raise it out of the darkness, other than offering it light and love? And if we just call things evil, it's going to stay like that. If we experience our life as this was evil, that was bad or whatever, and we stick with that, we're not going to offer spirit to it. It will never come out of the darkness. We just did Plato's cave. How many people are stuck in the darkness? What happens when you go out into the light? Oh man, that changes everything. So there's a voice inside of our head, and it's the tree of life. Eat freely off of that tree. All right? Try it a lot. There's plenty of good fruit on it. Nowhere in here are we talking about having this thing go away, because it can't. In Revolver again, he tries to shoot himself in the head, and then he comes back anyways. You can't kill the ego, nor should you want to. But what we don't want to do is live our life by it, because that's the life of separation and suffering, okay? What we have to do, and this is every human being, we have to wake up that other voice inside ourselves. We have to wake it up and make sure that it's dominant. That's called born again. That's called enlightenment. Jesus says a man cannot mount two horses or bend two bows. You're going to either serve one or the other. Well, which one do you want to serve? Wolf, right? Which wolf are you going to feed? This one or this one? Now, you're going to have to give some time to this one, because you do need to know when your appointments are and what you should eat for dinner. No problem. Just make sure that this one becomes the primary one. So here we have the simplest of all those words, the simplest of all teachings. Okay? I put my hand on a hot stove. I say, ouch, I pull it away instantly. Who needs to think that one through? We get that. But why, when we feel emotional pain, you feel something on the inside, why do we not pull away? Why do we come up with a whole bunch of reasons why it's justified? And why what I should do is keep resenting on that person, and why this situation is bad. And then we loop We become addicted to that. Why do we do that? Why don't we just pull away and do the most empowering thing? Oh, I must be looking at it from the perspective of the ego. Now, I'm not saying the situation is good or bad. I'm not. It just is what it is. I'm saying that you have a chance to look at it from a different angle. And if we pull away from the ego's way of looking at it, now we have a chance for peace. And now what we're literally doing is decreasing the ego, and we're going to listen to that still small voice. And then check it out. See if it works. As all the great prophets have told us, of course it's going to work. Once you start listening to that voice, it's going to whisper, it's okay. You're going to be okay. In fact, this is all going to work out in the end. And there is an afterlife and stuff like that. That's what the voice says to you. Can't hear it if you got the noisy gong and the clanging cymbal going on. But it's great therapy to immediately feel pain and then say, how can I look at this different? We're not talking about kicked in the shins kind of pain, okay? We're talking about the emotional pain, that type of suffering. How can I look at this different? And if you've got a Holocaust survivor like Viktor Frankl saying, once I gave my suffering, and he had plenty, once I gave it some meaning, it changed. Again, I call that street cred. All right, I'm going to listen to that guy. What did Jesus do during his crucifixion? He told Peter before his crucifixion that he was Satan, get behind me. Because Peter, was looking at it from the ego perspective. I did it again. Peter was saying to Jesus, we're not going to let them kill you. They're not going to kill our prophet. They're not going to kill our leader. And what was Jesus saying? I'm not going to die. You see it as dying because you think I'm a physical body. But I'm not going to die. In fact, I'm going to physically, spiritually, even though I'll come back if you need to see my body again. And what does he tell Thomas, the doubter? He says, oh man, blessed are those who believe without seeing. If you can believe this exists without seeing it, and that's what Jesus is calling blessed. So the idea that the physical self must stay alive in order for life to matter, Jesus totally gave it new meaning, didn't he? And what did he do along the way? He loved, forgave, was merciful towards the people that treated him worst. What ego wants to do that? Right? Have at it. You can stay stuck in the world. That's totally fine. Every prophet says it's your free will. It's your point of free will. Which one are you going to pick? Now, remember, it doesn't mean you have to hug people. Doesn't mean you have to vote for them. Doesn't mean you have to make them a pie. None of that kind of stuff. But forgive them you must. Or you'll stay stuck in suffering. I could go on. Tons of them. Great examples of people who suffered. And what did they see? They layered it with a different meaning. That's our collective journey together. Those who choose this, those who put their hand on a hot stove and say, I want to go different. I want to go in a different direction. They're going to choose this voice. And if you listen to it more and more, now we're back to the beginning. In God we trust. Now we're back to listening to a voice so often that you can recognize it. Then it becomes your primary voice. Thanks to Hebb's law, the science of practicing things, you get so good at it, it's like a language. It becomes reflexive. When someone does something, you can immediately listen to that voice. This guy has decreased and this has increased.